This is episode 226 of the Gold Squadron podcast. I'm your host, Dion Morales, and today I'm joined by Marcel. I have a useful question. Manzano.
Pick me. Pick me.
Will, I'm about to ban all y'all. Hagewood.
Good evening, everybody.
And Ryan, the end of the bidding, Staniszewski.
It's happening. The happening of the bidding.
All right, so for anybody who hasn't been up to date, let's give you guys a quick summary of what's happened over the last few days. On Thursday, AMG, for their mini extravaganza, they had an X-Wing panel where they talked about a lot of changes that are happening to X-Wing, some things that are upcoming. We did do a initial reactions cast right after that, and today what we're going to be doing is touching on a lot of those same things, but specifically we want to hear from our audience, hear from our community, kind of see what are some of the consistent question marks and worries that are coming up so that we can take note of the questions, see kind of what we think might be happening. Maybe the answers came forward, because I will tell you a lot of small things kind of trickled out during a lot of the other casts that they were doing during that weekend. They did a bunch of painting stuff, so a lot more kind of casual streams, and they were answering small questions here or there, and I'm sure they were not surprised that a lot of those questions came up. So the answer to your question may have been answered. We might have that answer, we might not, but we're just gonna kind of dive right in, and we might be rehashing some of the stuff we talked about last on Thursday, but I think it's okay, because this is really the news of the hour. This is really where we have to live right now. Now, where I kind of want to start, gentlemen, is I know for myself, and I'm not going to get into specifics yet, that after sleeping on it a few days and really thinking about what some of the changes that are coming, that I do my emotions around it have changed a little bit. I think I've become overall more positive than I was before, after actually internalizing and thinking around some of the more things, rather than going, because we just jumped right into it. Everything was just raw on Thursday, but now we could have a little bit more thought. We'll throw it to you. Just kind of overall, how you feeling after a few days?
I think my knee has become unjerked, and we're starting to realize the benefits and what do I want to say, the foundations moving forward that can come a part of this. Still a lot of questions to be answered for sure, but for the most part, it seems to be a beneficial way to go forward.
Yeah, similar. I think mostly it's like Will said, I have more questions now, how the details are all laid out, and I'm excited to see the end of the month. Likely, because they said points are shown at the end of the month. I assume along with those points, which they had said were very large in change in terms of the amount of things they were shifting around, maybe not the amount of points per thing, but we'll see. But my hope is we'll also receive those new rules and maybe tournament type regulation documents. I'm mainly just probably more so rules first. I don't know if they'll have the OP documents set yet for that. But I'm just excited to see the details and what their points structure for all the ships, what their mindset is on everything with these new foundationally rule changing effects.
Marcel.
Yeah, I think like everyone, my initial reaction kind of like just settled a bit. I don't think I looked at anything negatively other than I wanted more organized play information, which we didn't get. I actually thought all the changes were outside of my trolling online. But you guys should already know that I'm going to troll no matter what. Like I didn't have any real things against that. I mean, whatever the rules are going to be the same for everyone else. So if you play a certain kind of list, or if you don't play the certain kind of list, there's no advantage to anyone because everybody's still ultimately going to play by the same rules. However, what I've found myself is actually a little bit unmotivated to build and play, because I'm thinking in my head, like, in 2 weeks, like, everything that I'm building is either, you know, the upgrades are going to change, the rules are going to change, the points are going to change. So why bother? I'm kind of like, so I don't know how you guys, and I'm curious, I wanted to ask that when I said I got a question. That's what I wanted to ask, like, you guys, like, how do, you know, again, me, that I'm not really too excited or motivated to build anything right now, knowing that it's kind of just for funsies. But in 2 weeks, when the points or when the actual rules come out, I know I'm going to be stuck to my phone or to Yasby or something, just being like, oh, what can I build here? What can I build? And probably like bothering everyone on you know, the looking for games chat, just trying to get games in. And so that's where I'm at right now. I'm at a weird lull of excitement to play right now. I'm excited to play. I'm excited for that to be the reality already, so I can play in that reality. So it's just kind of weird.
I find that interesting because I will tell you, Marcel, today, so I started getting ready today for Wednesday. By the way, we should be, assuming that everything works, I got to double check with Pastimes. We will be live from Pastimes, Will commentating, Will and friends, and we have that planned for this Wednesday starting at 5 p.m. But I actually, when I was building my list for Wednesday, I felt liberated, to be completely honest, even with some of the small tweaks, with the idea of that bids don't matter. Because, you know, in our Pastimes chat today, I said, guys, even though we don't have the new points for this weekend, for this week, let's, you know, bids don't matter. We have the bids essentially being negative points for you, or being counted for your opponent. And for the rounds, we said, you know, we're still going to play 75 minutes to keep it organized, but we'll go with the longer turn limit, even though I will say that I doubt anybody will get to 15. But we'll go with 15 rounds just to leave it nice and open and not get too restricted yet. More of just trying to get used to it. For me, I was liberated. I was like, oh, let's build a 200. The bid doesn't matter because I have zero control over who's going to be first player. I'm just going to build something that seems fun. And I built a four ship list that's sitting right here. And I'm excited. I'm excited to play it on Wednesday. Like I built a 200 and didn't have to worry about the bid, and am ready to face the consequences either way. That's where I am. But at the same time, Marcel, I understand you're excited for, you want that big, you're ready for the big wave. You're like, let's go, give me all the changes. You want to start prospecting those points.
Yeah, I feel like Ryan, when asked to play extended, he's like, can I wait until a hyperspace tournament? You know, I feel like that. Like I enjoy the game, but I know that in a couple weeks, new toys are coming out, and I want to play with the new toys. Toys being rules.
Yeah, I mean, Marcel, I'm with you too. My thing is just want to know the details so I can start thinking about where I want to move forward with types of things I'm interested in trying and playing, and what small point upgrades that were never taken before now something I need to consider or think about taking myself. So yeah, I mean, I'm not too motivated to play right now, besides just, you know, if I have the opportunity to do a couple pickup games with friends, I might do that and just try out the new rules even without the details, just to see how things flow. But not any hardcore list building thinking right now. too much is going to change.
Now, I think this is a good chance to, I want to hit on a couple of things that that was unclear, and I've gotten some clarifications on. So let's clear some of the muck out of the way, because I see some of the chat spreading some of the, like, I'm not going to say misinformation, but some of the confusion in there, okay? A couple of things. I'll go ahead and hit first player, okay? First player will be randomized, not choice. And that is set at the beginning of the game and stays for the entire game. All right? It's not roll and then decide and then it sticks. It's roll and that's what it is. It's more of a, cause a lot of us think about like, oh, we'll roll a die and whoever wins the die roll on a tie gets to choose. That's not it anymore. It is, let's go coin flip. Heads or tails, I'm heads, you're tails, and whoever, quote unquote, is chosen by the coin is now the first player. All right, that is what it is. It's not I won the coin toss, I get to choose. That's not what it is. It is actually randomized, and that's it. All right. So that's the first thing I wanted to get done. Now, to address something, a lot of people are like, well, I wish they would have thought about this, and that was alternating from turn to turn, who's first player. I will tell you from my sources, it was thought about, and it was deemed too complicated. And I know that you might be saying, how is that complicated? We could just like pass a thing back and forth. There's some weird things with what's something Q? What's the word? Something Q. Help me out here, guys.
The ability queue.
Ability queue.
Ability queue. Yes.
There it is. The ability queue.
I was enjoying you fishing.
Yeah, so there's some weird stuff that can happen with the ability queue when you end up flipping back and forth, and they just decided, you know what, we're gonna get rid of that complication and set it random at the beginning and leave it for the entire game. Okay, so that was the first thing I wanted to address. The second thing was some people were concerned that in tournament play there would not be a timer. They clearly addressed it. There was an actual clip where they said, of course, in a tournament organized setting, there's going to have to be a timer because we have to worry about, you know, how long places are open. Like, they very clearly addressed that. So will there be a time limit? Yes. Might it also implement a turn limit as well? Maybe. That we don't know. So that's the second. Those are like the two big things I saw just kind of being confused and rolled around. So I wanted to address those two things. All right. So Ryan, you went fishing for some questions. You were looking at our list of submissions. We did end up getting some more. But go ahead, give me the first one that you saw that you thought was a really good question.
I'd like to make a side note that if our thumbnail for this episode on YouTube isn't all of us fishing in a boat, then I think we've done it wrong.
I can make that happen.
Too many fishing references, but we'll start with our own Daniel Leon Epionic. Starting with, do we think bans or restrictions will be permanent or temporary, similar to a season of hyperspace? Furthermore, how are bans and restrictions helpful for new players who may not know about the resources available? He's trying to make sure, you know, he understands it keeping them from being dumpster at their initial game, but they could very well be bringing a ban list and not know about it and feel slightly discouraged about that situation. So I guess I'll address the latter half of that actually first. It clears... as much as it can be helpful to new players going forward to get rid of abusive cards and putting them on a ban, or they did say restricted list. That is another thing too. So we might see a weighing of percentages of what things need to be banned, which might be a much smaller list than what's being restricted, format or not. But as that is on AMG to make sure that is a communicated and easy to find list, both for existing and new players. So however they need to post it up, however they need to communicate, they need to make sure it's as clear as possible. Now, as discouraged as it may be, for the very first time someone shows up and makes that mistake, I don't know how often they're going to make that mistake a second time. It's just going to take that one time that, unfortunately, if they show up to an event or a store like League Night or whatever, I doubt anyone's going to be super critical and not offer to let them borrow something that is not part of the ban list, or let them make that adjustment. I would assume if you are partaking in a large event, you have likely done the research to make sure your list is legal, or someone has checked it, such as a TO, to make sure it's legal before the event gets started. But assuming this is more of on a store level or league, they'll find out, unfortunately, the first time. It's a reality. It's going to happen. And likely the community will support them and tell them where this can be found and let them move on with the night with a legal list, so to say. For his first part of his question, I would say I think bans might be more permanent than restrictions. Restrictions seem like something that might be a little more fluid with formats, whether it's a hyperspace or whatever the future of hyperspace is, and the scenarios or whatever formats that AMG creates. What do you guys think?
I about the first part about the ban list, people bringing stuff to ban list after building a list. I actually don't think that's going to be an issue at all, because since the cards don't have any printed values on them anymore, they have to go to the website. They have to go to the documents, and they're more than likely building it on YASB, just because they have to go somewhere to get the point. So if they're not getting it on YASB because they're not familiar with YASB, they're looking at the PDF document, and the PDF document will have whatever upgrade that's a supernatural, because I think that's probably the one that everybody wants to ban. Or Admiral Sloan. Let's assume Sloan is banned. I'm putting my marker down. Sloan is banned. And they're trying to find out how much Sloan costs, and they don't see it in the list. Either they're not going to add it, or they're going to do some more research and figure out about the ban list. So I don't think that's going to be, that portion of it is going to be a big deterrent whatsoever, because they'll figure it out right away in list building.
Will?
Yeah, I mean, I have strong opinions on a ban list, banning cards. Restrictions, I could see the value in, for like, Boba can't use Force users, or Fire Sprays can't use Force users, as just like a ban, right? Or excuse me, as a restriction. I don't know what else you could restrict, other than if they're like, you can only bring 4 dorsal turrets in your list or something like that, right? Like that, I could see some, but like that's essentially just pips to me. You're just eradicating cards at that point. I don't like the bans though. I think they're a lot of what Epionic and even Jonah asked a similar question about. I don't think that bans, how do I want to say it? I don't think that they are necessary. We have tools in place already. You got different formats. You got just pointing something out to like 30 or 40 points if you really don't like it. And you could use these tools and formats to curve a lot of that things that would be problematic. So I don't, and or just errata the card. I understand like errata is you're gonna end up in the same situation of if you just like banned a card, right? People not knowing what it is, not knowing that it's banned, things like that. But I'm just going to echo what Marcel said. Is like no one's printing out PDFs and getting their calculator out to build lists. So it should be easy to find these restrictions, or hopefully it's easy to find the restrictions for players. But I think everybody it's going to be the talk of the town about the first bans. So I'm both excited and scared to see what those happen to be.
Well, so here's a couple of things, again, with having some of the conversations I've had, re-listening to a lot of what AMG's saying, because I think and I've been vocal about this already, that the majority of the community that is very active on social media and will outwardly either give dissent or praise are generally those that are in the competitive scene or a very active player, even if they're not in the competitive scene. So I think sometimes the way that they say things, because a lot of people who are active in the scene, we know the vocabulary, and sometimes they're not always using the vocabulary that we want or that we're used to say possibly what they mean. So some of the things that I've been kind of listening through, one of the things, I've been thinking about, like, we have hyperspace already. I know that a lot of people are kind of pointing to that. We have hyperspace already. There is a possibility that hyperspace doesn't exist anymore. Okay? So what I'm hearing from really listening to AMG is that likely we will end up in a 2-format system again, okay? And there will be what we know as extended, and that it will be extended will essentially end up being your kitchen table, do whatever you feel like at X-Wing, okay? And then you will end up with a curated format that is hyperspace-esque. Because here's the thing, when at first I was on the fence on ban list, but we've had a ban list already. It's just called hyperspace, essentially. And what I think we end up with is a other curated format that says these are things you can play, these are things you cannot play. You can have X number of this and X number of that. And I think we end up there. And this is just kind of listening to what they're saying, because they not once in any of their conversations have they ever said the word hyperspace. Like, that hasn't been in their vocabulary. And I think most likely we end up with some type of curated format that ends up being the normal way to play X-Wing. I don't know if that makes sense, but like the standardized regular actual X-Wing, I don't know, actual X-Wing. Do you guys kind of know what I'm saying here?
Yeah, they also didn't use the word extended. The only word that I remember coming out was not words plural, were standard, and they use standard mostly for list building. Standard, like they use standard to define what we see now as quick builds. But they basically they didn't really talk about game modes other than what you play, and then these alternative play scenarios, which I'm sure will have their own list building rules and things like that, like the Aces High, the X-Wing League or whatever you guys like, the Fuzzball League or whatever,
right?
Kickball, Droid Ball, whatever, and the like the thematic side things that they're doing. So those I assume will have their own list building challenges, especially if you're playing something thematic and it's like they were saying, the Battle of Yavin. It's kind of you're not going to throw something from a different era into the Battle of Yavin because it kind of takes you away from the theme. But for actual, I'm not going to say competitive, for actual regular play, standard play, they didn't really get into any of that, and I don't think that now that in my view they're moving hyperspace, the version of hyperspace which is curated, to be the regular play, and what's hyperspace now is moving into like themed narrative or side kind of weird things like Jank Tank or whatever it would be. That makes sense?
Yeah, and there's another thing to consider that you brought up, Marcel, is that these banned or restricted lists could be a lot more implemented or affected in these scenario formats. There just may be some upgrades or cards that just They just can't be designed around for the developers to make a fun and engaging experience, whether it's objective competitive play or scenario competitive play or scenario or objective casual play, either or. You know, like let's say they found that Trajectory Simulator just makes the middle part of the objective on this board a nightmare to design around. We don't want that card to be in this. We don't want bombs launching off of things constantly. Right. And say Nim with Scum saying, well, if you go here at any point in the game to get your objective points, you get to take a bomb because I said so. Type of
that
thing.
actually makes a lot of sense. I didn't think about that, Ryan. Like, banning seismic charges in an objective-based format that relies on asteroids being there.
There might be certain, wordings or things that they just can't have in there because of how it interacts with their objective or scenario. Yeah.
All right. That's good. And this is, again, right now we're in a spot where we don't know where it is, but I think the most important, and I want to hit this before as we continue to dive, is that in the end, I think the most positive thing out of this all is the fact that X-Wing is in fact being worked on, right? I think that's probably the best part, because we did not get the Armada notice, right? That is what we don't want. We got an active, like, hey, we're doing stuff. We're doing stuff, which I think is the best part. And it might not be knee-jerk reactions, and I think, Ryan, you had said that you had seen some people like sell the collection, or these overreactions from people. When we were talking,
I don't think I've seen the sell the collection yet, but there have been some pretty loud voices out there.
Like, let's live it first. Different is not necessarily bad, and also, I think we'll also get to some of the opinions that I think are, I'm going to say, I guess an opinion can't necessarily, I don't want to say invalid, but I think there's a lot of biased opinions. There's a lot of biased opinions out there, and we'll address, I think, some of those as we go here. Go ahead, Ryan. Marcel, this person right here.
Yeah, guy in the green. Guy in the green, not with the green behind. Yeah. I'm just curious where you guys are. I want to do a too early to call ban. Like, I want us to guess what people are banning, and let's not do anything that's over 20 points. Let's assume anything over 20 points is getting banned, because they already tried to ban it with high points.
Do we think that's how they're going to go the route with it?
I think Supernatural, Luke, they've tried to ban them by points already. So I think they've already been identified as things that should not be in the game by making them I would even go as far as saying, like, Delta 7B, they tried to do that on a certain so that might even be a restricted one where Anakin can't take that or something, because they pointed that at like 20 something points, or Ensnare as well.
Really high, yeah.
Ensnare is 20 something. So anything not at 20 or above, I'm curious. Because Ensnare, actually, that might be another one. Like, Ensnare might be another one that gets
those type of cards with 7B and Ensnare make it sort of a different ship, and you have to make the point cost high versus the base chassis. Although 7B, I think, might be fine not being restricted or banned, but the play experience of dealing with Ensnare is not a fun time, and I am always advocating that to be gone from the game anyway. But that's besides the point.
All right, so let's go one each.
So one each, not high point cost. Actually,
anything under 20. Yeah.
And we can't say Zam. She's obvious, right?
So Marcel, because we know what Marcel's gonna say. So Marcel, you have to pick something other than Sloan. All right.
Will?
I'll go first with an easy one, and this might target one specific ship in general, but I would actually like to see a ban on Rose Tico. It's an extremely powerful ability with essentially no downside.
Want to clarify, pilot or crew?
Oh yeah, I guess she is a pilot, isn't she? No,
she's a very well taken pilot a lot too.
No, she's totally fine as the pod. Like, she could go up a little bit in price point. 25 is absurd, but no, I'm actually talking the crew. She is one of the few crew outside of like Force users that can like guarantee you a passive mod every single round, and is just absolutely abused on a Rey, Finn, Falcon. So a little niche, but that's a card I could see banned.
All right.
I'll take one. I'll say I was gonna say Sloan. I will not say Regen because I like Regen, but that I think that's on the bubble. But or let me say non-named Regen, maybe not R2D2, but like the generic R2. But what I'd say is where I'm gonna go is with the original Slave 1 title. It's the one that gets.
That's a good one.
Yeah, because they got the second.
One, yeah,
the Scum Slave 1. I think that gets the ban.
Oh man, there's a lot of recent stuff that maybe just hasn't gotten the correct points adjustment yet that I don't want to hit. Like I could say FTC, but like they haven't done their balancing act yet, I think. So I'll say one that we've had since the beginning. I'll go with Sense. I think after stuff like all the reflexes cards and pre-dial repositions, the next target for me is dial peaking, and that's the most widely available and usable.
That's pretty good. I was going to say Sense as well. So
there's more dial peaking cards if you want to say that.
Yeah, I mean Cassian is probably the next one that comes to mind.
Kill V Morati. V Morati is overpowered.
Okay, so how about hold on. All right, so Prime Thrusters. Prime Thrusters is something that is a road that worries me a little bit, because essentially one of the things we're talking about, if we kind of dig to the core of the issue, is that we want the game to have consequences, right? You make a choice, you made a bad choice, here's your consequence. Cards that have no consequences that allow you to make up for consistently without some type of charge or something is problematic to me. So for instance, a great version of it, I think, is Contraband Cybernetics. Is a fantastically designed card. One turn, you get to mitigate stress stuff. Prime Thruster says, hey, you got boost and barrel? Baby, that stress don't actually matter. You can, people are like, but you can, it has a limit of 3. Hey, that is a couple turns of being able to mitigate that. So cards in that vein that don't have charges, aka cough cough AMG, make sure more things have charges, I think could be an issue. And over time, as a new version of it comes out, might be replaced.
Your Contraband Cybernetics wants to meet Mr. Cutthroat at Jabba the Hutt.
Oh, well, yeah, that's true. That's true. But yeah, I guess to go off of Marcel's question there. All right, Will, take the next one.
Okay, so let's take a look here. Actually, I want to go into Worm's question here. We got to color some of these so we know which ones we've done already.
I was about to take care of that.
Thank you. But yeah, all right. So Worms asks some pretty straightforward questions here, but it opens up a larger discussion, in my opinion. I ask, is passive sensors Vader? Remember, passive sensors allows you to take an action when you engage, and then X1 Vader could then force or use his ability to use the force to chain actions off of that. So essentially you get to barrel roll at the start of engagement. Anyways, is passive sensors Vader the best ace in the game right now? Does the not bidding help Vault Scarus, who likes to actually shoot before other I5s, likes to be first player? Because that's how he's got a similar ability to passive sensors. When he engages, he gets to take actions. was this all done to make Vault Scarce playable now? And then I'm adding in my own question here of who benefits the most from no bid. Obviously, my opinion is that Passive Sensors Vader has a lot of tools now that he didn't before. I mean, he had them before, but you could just take a bid, right? Like, why pay 5 points for advanced or passive sensors? You could just take a 5-point bid and be in about the same position. Unless you want to block and then barrel roll off a block, which is pretty funny. What do you guys think? Who benefits the most from no bid?
I think all the big bases, the ones that cannot reposition are the ones like the Bosk, the
Hera,
Dengar. Huh?
Hera can kind of reposition.
Yeah, Hera, the arcs, let's say, what's Nora Wexley on the arc, things like that. Again, Dengar moving in, things that don't reposition much and just joust. Now they can do a better job of countering aces that usually fly around them, and so they'll have less of that. Plus, yeah, so I think those are probably like big base ships in general. I think are the ones that benefit the most.
Yeah, I think in line with that, Marcel, those big base ships tend to be, unless you're a Falcon who has boost, that can do those sweeping large moves and arc dodge in that manner. It's the more jousty style aces, your wedge, your quick draw, those type of. Normally, they don't get a ton of benefit. I mean, it is always helpful to move after someone else, but they don't have the repositional capability to really get out of stuff. They're just there to hit really hard. But it also makes them a little more predictable as to where they can be. So if now they can move second, it is on the onus of maybe the double reposition aces to say, I just have to be somewhere where I know you can't get me, which will take a little bit of a learning curve to get used to, but I think is a lot more attainable than people think. Because those double repositions can definitely get you in spots where a wedge or a quick draw just can't get to without losing some of its potential firepower if they want to try and barrel roll, or if wedge tries to boost, for example. I think Passive Sensors Vader might be considered one of the better aces out of this, because that Passive Sensors ability at I6 is really, really good for that, because he has his actionable ability off of it. We'll have to see if that's something that has a cost increase, or if AMG recognizes that, or just says we're making Vader one of the best aces in the game because it's Vader. Go for it. Whatever. Defender Vader. I mean, he had a lot of point cost with him originally. He still does right now, and cares a lot less about bidding. He can get more tools and friends around him or on him, so whichever he wants to go with. So Vader up across the board. In terms of the Vault Scarce specifically, Vault Scarce wasn't really used now, and he could have been put in lists where he didn't bid either and still have went first and first player. The problem with Vault is he's I5, so the other I6s can hunt him down before he even gets the chance to use his abilities, which is the sad part. So I hope Vault has a place to exist, because he's cool, though.
I think all the defenders as well, because defenders with their 4Ks, just any defender in general, including Vader Defender. Vader Defender doesn't mind going first. An evade is nice, and he doesn't mind going second. And then just defenders in general, with the 4Ks, your time on target is always going to be high. So I think even who else has K turns without getting any consequences?
Force users.
Force users. Yeah, Force users. Ray. Ray that Ray with the title. So people that can get behind you and say, okay,
any rebel list with Leia crew.
Exactly, like you can outmaneuver me, or you can double reposition and get out of my arc this first time, but I'm gonna K turn without consequences. I think those lists all of those ships that can do that are automatically better?
I don't even know. Like I think because my head is being wrapped around in a couple places, because I feel like the ban list and the bid changing and that not mattering anymore, and this random initiative, I think the way that we're gonna have to think about X-Wing is gonna be completely new. I don't want to say that it's a new game, but we're gonna be able to use a lot of the same tools. The bones of this is going to be the same, but depending on how extreme, and I use extreme not with a negative connotation, I mean like how far they go with a ban list could completely change how we go about list building, how we go about deciding what abilities are good and what abilities are bad. There may be pilots that never seen the light of day that all of a sudden you get to kind of like think about. It's like, hey, I don't have to worry about a bid anymore. I have X number of points. Hey, I never played random TIE fighter that you never thought of before, which of course that's not coming to mind right now. But this question is hard for me to answer, because I do think a ship like Volt Scarus who currently in any of the Galaxies events, I think we've seen it taken once and it didn't do very well. But that's an example of a pilot that could potentially go from never played, never in the overall sense compared to the community, to all of a sudden, hey, it pops up once in a while. I'm wondering if maybe a meta will always form. Like that's unavoidable, but there may be some underutilized pilots that actually see the light of day soon, and who those are, I'm gonna have to think longer about that. I think Patrick Hansen is a great player. He did identify two very, I think, I'm gonna say more obvious versions that are gonna end up potentially bubbling to the top. But of course, we don't know where the changes are. I want to ask a question off this question. What do you think will matter more to AMG? Fluff, theme, or game balance? Because that's one thing that I see getting thrown around a lot. Is, you know, we even did it in today's cast. Well, Darth Vader is the Lord of the Sith. Why shouldn't he be good? But if he's problematic for the balance of the game, does he get the axe? But it is also a Star Wars game. Like I don't want to be in AMG's place having to make those decisions, because I think it's going to be tough. But at least they give themselves more levers by having a ban list and the points. Potentially, it's like, hey, you could still fly Vader if you want. Might not be the most competitive because of this other lever that we pulled on them.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Can I ask something? What's the difference between fluff and theme?
The same thing. Sorry.
Oh,
the fluff and theme. Sorry. That I'm using that as overall, like, you know, some people
more tied to the narrative character than game balance.
Right.
Is what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Marcel.
No, I was thinking to that point, like when we were talking a little bit earlier, like predictions of what they could ban, and I said Slave 1. The only reason I went with Slave 1 is because they already have a different version of Slave 1. I don't know that I would have said Slave 1 because it's so iconic if it wasn't another version already there. I would say the same for Palpatine in the Empire. Like Palpatine in the Empire is a redonkulous good card. Palpatine in the Separatist is also really good. Like every time you shoot me, you're going to get stressed. I'm going to be able to coordinate at any initiative. Like those are really good lists, but they are also iconic fluff to what you're saying. But I think that they're going to tend to keep that separated with the thematic kind of, again, I don't know what to call them, but the campaigns or the other game modes that are not the traditional 200 points, six rocks, whatever, 206 that everybody says. By the way, I just figured out what 206 means like a week ago, and I've been playing for like 5-6 years. So there you go. But anyway, I think that they'll keep them separate. I don't think that they'll shy away from putting the axe to something that is, like a Luke Skywalker. Actually, Luke Skywalker is a great example. Luke Skywalker gunner. It's Luke Skywalker. I don't think that it'll be an issue like putting an axe to that, because it basically makes your dial doesn't matter. Like, I'm just going to go that way. I don't care where you are. I'm still going to shoot you. I could put that in an initiative 1, and my initiative 1 will always shoot your initiative 6,
Yeah, so with the theme versus balance, I mean, so I'm going to start with like sort of a cop-out answer. They have to balancing act that in some manner to make sure the game hits that Star Wars theme that people always wanted to make it to want it to feel like, but at the same time create a game that's balanced so that there isn't clearly issues to where people can exploit. So, but are they going to potentially sway the balance one way or the other of the act of balancing the game on one side versus scenario casual, theme level feel? They could, shift the percentages on that a little bit based upon what they're presenting you in ways to play. Because there's probably clearly some stuff that isn't, like, for example, we just played a month or two back the Trident thing, where it was the Leviathan hunt, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that if you took that like Leviathan at like its most mean point and brought it into epic play, and it was like costed the same amount as like a 200 point list, because that's essentially what we're given. We each get some amount of points to go hunt the thing down. I'm pretty sure that doesn't turn out very well if you actually put 2 players on each side of the board and play that out. So they'll have different formats that sway one way or the other. But I think if they were going to err on one side as a higher importance, it's probably game balance to make sure the rest of all the experiences are as equal as possible.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Marcel, you want to pick the next question?
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. How will ace play be affected by the coin toss? Will we see pure double, triple, double, triple ace? I don't know what that means. Or maybe it will affect how ace list will be built by potentially adding some beef X, switch Sunter by a thick, basically like ace plus a bunch of not ace. Do we expect aces to go up, to go down in points? Does Sunter's worth his points if you can't guarantee moving second? That was a lot of words basically to say, what do we feel will be the new place in the X-Wing for aces? I'll start. So I actually don't know how the points will go, because it depends how everything else points goes. But let's assume that the thank you. Let's assume that the points stay exactly the same, but all we're changing is the way that initiative goes. I don't think that you necessarily make Sunter cheaper because of it, because Sunter will still be moving after like 90% of the stuff, that's 95% of the stuff that's out there now, and 50% of the time it will be moving after 50% of the time in that little 5% that it's actually playing against other initiative 6s, it will also move last. So it's still just as good as it was before. So I don't think aces go necessarily cheaper. I think that you just have to adjust the way that you build to where maybe 3/6s now, you're kind of committing to 3/6s, and then you're kind of guaranteeing yourself to move last in most, in almost, let's say, 98% of matches. Or I forgot who asked the question, but like whoever asked that question said, you pair up your ace with other things. You've seen the things like I don't know. Actually, Carson Ray is probably a great example of that. He's got Poe at initiative 6, Lulo at initiative 5, and then he's got Rose and Jess Pavla, which is kind of like a little beef tank. So he's got a very consistent initiative 3 jousting block, and then he's got an initiative 5 and an initiative 6. Would he like to move second? Yes, he would like to move second. Does he need to move second? No. So he's a good example of a list that's well rounded. Or another one is Daniel Leon's Zam and 5 initiative 1 Trade Federation drones. Again, he's got a high initiative ship, but then he's got a jousting block that allows that high initiative ship to basically out position ships and things like that. So I think it impacts list building decisions, but it does not change the value of the ships as they are today.
I think something that I want to add on there is, so in every meta we've ever had, there are certain list archetypes that just don't work, right? There's certain, you could think of maybe something that you've tried, you realize that version of a list doesn't specifically work. And I think the lists that will be very risky to bring would be a list that purely leans on moving last. And I think that is, and this is where I don't want to hurt people's feelings, okay? I don't want to hurt people's feelings, but, okay, if the only way you can win an X-Wing game is by moving last, then you have some skills that need to be developed, okay? And there are, I think if you like flying aces, I think the best one to kind of start off with, and one that has great options moving both first and second at a high initiative, is Sunterfell, because he has an ability that gives him a free modification with a focus, okay? Has access to the evade action, and can be a great blocker with boosting and barrel rolling, okay? I think that would be a great way to adjust, to kind of get an equilibrium adjustment for your expectations of aces, because you have some giant watermelon random. Sorry, those of you who are just listening. I think that it's just going to take an adjustment, and that is, you will need to find more tools than just moving last. I think that's kind of where the crux of some of the worry about aces that I'm seeing out there is that you're going to have to find a list that potentially has more tools than just moving last. And I think, honestly, I'm kind of excited that it is opening up some of the possibilities of, hey, bring an ace, but also bring something. We use Carson Ray's list as a great example of, hey, also bring something else, some other tech that you're just not relying on one thing. And I think that's going to start to create a more varied type of meta, something where a list that now we might look at it as seems uncohesive, but in later might end up being a list that now covers has answers for many different archetypes and types of lists.
Yeah, actually, to back up your point about if you were a player that played lists that moving last was your only trick because that's what you had to do to win your game, before in the before AMG rule change times, you were probably correct, because I'm going to steal a little bit of numbers from Chris Allen here, who did a little bit of stat running. An average of your chance of winning increases by an average of 30% or more if you have a larger bid than your opponent, if they have those equal initiatives, your 5s and your 6s. That's just comically more important than a lot of those upgrades in the game that people will tack on that would lose you, say, the bid. And now in this AMG rule set, lists that have to move last are not well-rounded lists anymore. They never really were before, because they use the bid system to guarantee moving second. So now, because it's random, they don't have control over it, they're going to have to create more well-rounded lists, which, without the bid system and the ability to spend all those points, I've seen rumblings around the internet, people concerned that, like, oh, it's going to be swarm meta. What are my aces going to do? I'm like, your aces have all these points to spend now. Like, they just have to roll the 50-50 to figure out if the ace versus ace matchup they have in their Swiss event, if they're going to move second or first. But against everything else lower initiative, they now can spend all the points to get any tech and tools they feel they need to deal with the rest of the matchups in Swiss.
I just want to say that math is hard, and the examples that he gave, because I listened to it today. I was walking and going to the gym, and he was using an example saying, like, lists that had this won 30% of the time, and when they won the roll off, or when they had the initiative moving last, they won 60% of the time. So they're not winning 30% more. They're winning 100% more. They're doubling their odds of winning, from going from 30 to 60.
Well, that's the difference of specific powers. I'm thinking the average 30% is across the board. But you're right. There are examples where it's drastically different.
Yeah, I mean, the ones that want to move last, the ones that matter, like the initiative 5s, the initiative 6, the ones that are bidding for it, their likelihood of winning is doubling or more. It's not like 30% higher chance of winning. It's like a double % chance, or even more than double.
And to answer the question again, because I see it popping up in the chat again, I just want to reiterate our understanding from the sources I've been able to find and re-listening to AMG over and over again. Initiative is set at random at the beginning of the game. There's no choice, and it stays the entire game. It was deemed again, to answer the second part, because I see it in there, I see people like, well, what about alternating during the game? It was explored. It was deemed too complicated to track continuously. I know that because of things like the ability queue, and just adding one more thing to the game. And again,
let's also address the strategical impact that has, because we may have talked about it a little bit before we went live or started chatting on air. But what that also does is, if you alternate it, the player who just decides to change their engagement and stall it a turn later because they have second player the next turn, it's a lot of agents seeing, like, people maybe deciding to engage, but like specifically waiting for a turn, the other players then waiting for the other turn, and then just like there's a whole lot of like waiting for each other to do something and probably not a lot of actual fighting.
Right. Okay. And to address the question, what makes it hard? Listen, enough of y'all, including us, make enough mistakes in this game. Adding more stuff doesn't need to happen. None of y'all and none of us are perfect. Adding more complexity. Go ahead, Will.
I can barely read, and you expect me to count?
Look, and I've made definitely the mistake. We've all made this mistake before, where we start moving a ship and we're like, oh wait, or we start getting it. We move our ship, the last ship on the board. That's I6 moving after their ships, and you go and you just start to grab your dice, ready for attack, and you're like, wait, my opponent's I6 is actually supposed to shoot before me, and you got to roll that back. We've seen it. We know what happens.
All right. So, so let's go ahead and I want to pull this one. This is from Sebastian. He says, is AMG being overzealous in their changes? Perhaps too eager to put the AMG trademark stamp on a game that wasn't originally theirs to kind of, quote unquote, stake their claim. I want to address this one because I find it really interesting because I'm going to, I don't know about you guys. I remember being in college, and I promise this connects, okay? As for teaching, and we were always told, like, if you go into a job where somebody was doing a great job, they were beloved, and you're the new teacher and you're replacing like somebody who's retiring and was beloved, change very little at first and make small incremental changes. That was a very common thing that was told to me, and I will tell you from my experience, I took over my job and I changed so much the first year, and I took over for somebody who retired, and initially some people went, why? But once it was done, once I ripped the Band-Aid off, it was fine. I look at AMG's approach at going big at first as they started by identifying the problems. At least it seems that way, right? It seems like they started by identifying the problems, apply solutions that can all be undone and redone at some point, and see what goes forward. One of my worries with if they had gone kind of one piece at a time, that I think the community would have been even less malleable if they had not made big changes at once. By kind of ripping the Band-Aid off all at once, ban, restricted list, points change, possible, overall kind of structure changes. By doing it all at once, I think it actually kind of gets some of the growing pains out of the way, and then they can adjust those things as they go. Because, and to be honest, really, if there's anything new that they really did, because changing points isn't new, that's not new. Really, they've implemented one really actually new thing. And I know somebody was like, well, but what about turns? No, really the only new thing is the ban list / restricted list, because the number of turns, that's a ban. Like, I guess that isn't really new, right? That's a ban list.
No, the only thing is the initiative. Other than that, like,
right,
hyperspace was a ban list.
I think people need to separate the idea of a curated format and actually banning cards completely out of the game. Like, that is a possibility we need to be ready for, because as developers, they may not want to deal with developing around certain cards, no matter their point cost, just on a rules basis thing. I know a lot of people have keyed in on saying, oh, but this curated format, they'll ban this, but I assume they'll be. I wouldn't assume that cards, like a banned card, may straight be gone for good, ideally. And if you want to casual around and play kitchen table with your friends, reminisce about a card that got banned, go for it. But like in a tournament or organized play setting, it might just be straight gone 100%.
Think about the also the going back to the original question, making an impact and kind of wanting to play with your new toy. One of the things that we were talking about a little bit ago was like, would they go as far as banning some of the iconic things? We mentioned that a little bit, or maybe I mentioned it. I don't know. I got watermelon in the brain, but think about the possibilities. They can ban a Palpatine or a Luke or a Dooku. It allows them to build their own, and like if they want to leave a stamp, like, hey, I want Sidious. I want to build, I want the Emperor to be like my vision of the Emperor. So banning it, completely getting rid of it, allows you to remake it, reprint it, and resell it.
I mean, I wouldn't even, like, so this card is normally considered to be pretty bad. I wouldn't mind if they just ban it so they can make a better new one, and that's General Huck's crew. Like, General Hux is a fun character. He's got cool things, but man, he's never used. I don't know how low in points he needs to be without being free to be, like, used at all.
Rip Captain Cardinal, too. My boy, Captain Cardinal. He's great. Great in the books. Great in the books. Bad in X-Wing. But yeah, to circle back to Sebastian's question, my short answer is no. I don't think they're going too far at the beginning. I think they have to take a big swing to see what happens, and then you make your adjustments from there. Who's next? Who hasn't got to pick a question?
Well, that actually ties a lot into Nutano's question.
Mm-hmm.
Goes on a bit about how do we think the changes are too drastic in one go? Like they're trying to address too many issues all at once. And basically, Nutano is concerned that the major points update could potentially break the game. We've seen this with Nantex, the whole it's like Sky is Falling meta, when 6 Nantex were tearing it up. In like online tournaments, mostly, like I don't think the Sky fell in like casual play, but it definitely had an impact that rippled throughout the meta at that time. And we saw FFG at the corrected. What was it? Probably like 2 months or so. I know we had like what 3 or 4 tournaments where Nantex won, and then they corrected it before the final last year.
Yeah, totally not because of Galaxies. It totally wasn't the reason.
But Fang Long again was like, I don't need 6. Let's go 5, and still got it into the finals, if I'm not mistaken. So, but anyways. What is our opinions on maybe not let me rephrase that. Are we concerned that too many points updates could break the game? Could we see, do we, and this isn't really like speculation, this might just be like a feelings question, right? About how do we feel that the state of the game is going to progress with so many changes? And if my kind of question on this is, will we see the same kind of reactionary actions that FFG had made once they recognized they'd essentially broke the game?
I'll take this one first. I think the game is going to be different. But I also think history will repeat itself, Will. We will have new stuff. A good thing will be discovered. People will go, too good. And then over time, we will go, wait a second, this is how you fight that. And this is actually better. And things will develop. Every time we've had a points change and a release drop, the meta has transformed and evolved to adjust somehow to what is good, right? And we've always had this thought that there was likely lists and combinations that could have potentially been good, but just never saw the light of day because somebody didn't try it, right? Because there are so many possible combinations of things that could be good. With a points change, which we don't know how drastic it is, but let's say it is pretty big. Let's say there's a lot of fluctuation in points, plus a change in the main format having bans and not banned and restricted. We're going into a brand new game. I said it already. We're going into a brand new game. I think that could something be broken? Yes, but I think it's going to take a while for us to actually discover if it is or not And I would hope that AMG, because it's all digital materials, they should be able to be like, oh, we messed up, let's fix it. Marcellus, look like you had something to say.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, when you were saying like drastic, let's not forget that drastic change can also be whatever's not printed on the cards, which includes all of the available upgrades.
Mm-hmm.
So we might be, I mean, we don't know. Like, you might have TIE fighters with missiles now. Like, maybe. Like, who's to say no? Other than, I guess, Fluff. But anyway, all of that can be that way. And I happen to think that if they, two things. I don't know, and it depends on how many people they've got testing it, and then I don't want to say the quality of people. I'm going to say the variety of people, like the variety of people, because I'm not a playtester, so I don't know. But the variety of people, like if it's people that have a similar mindset and similar play styles and are from similar regions that are playtesting, you're probably gonna have a scenario like the Nantex, because those rocks aren't overturned during testing, versus what if you have a mix of people that like to get creative and you have another mix of people that are just trying to break the game purposely. So I think that'll have a lot to do with it. But as far as how do I feel, I think part of the question was how do I feel they'll react if they accidentally break the game. I would imagine that they would react even faster than those 2 months. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, you got to give it, like Dion said, you got to give time for it to figure out if it's really broken or if it's, we just haven't like figured it out yet. But they've got a lot riding on this, because this is their first major change, and to assume that they're not going to be like looking at how people react and how tournaments play out, online tournaments. They've got to be looking at online tournaments. Not only do they have to be looking at online tournaments, the play testers, I assume, are playing online against each other. I don't think the play testers are, in the middle of a pandemic, we're getting together. So I think they'll be pretty quick to pull the trigger on making a change if it's busted.
I mean, if you think about it, theoretically, if I recall timing correctly, Hera and Protector Gleb both had almost a week past release or reveal instant errata fix change clarification type things. Hera was originally used by a lot of the community at the time to throw someone a lock or focus to fulfill the requirements for a secondary weapon. Protector Gleb was almost allowed to pass enemy ships because of Hondo. If you have Protector Gleb and Hondo crew, you could pass enemy ships negative tokens, because it could be orange or red, to enemy ships by coordinating them with Hondo and then coordinating with your ships. Both of those things were shot down moderately quickly. So we know they're ready to pull the trigger on stuff that may have been missed, that are potentially game-breaking or not designed as the way they intended it to be. So if that's the current track record, they're pretty quick on that stuff, especially when it deals with errata or making sure cards intended a certain way, or rules, or something that gets found later that's broken. They're not waiting months for that at this point. They might be waiting to adjust things for balancing of points reasons, but if something directly, on wording of a card breaks it, they're not waiting to increase the points in that. They're waiting, they're going after it almost right away. The only few that have kind of stuck around, I think people think needs to be rewarded, but it doesn't have to, because it's one of the ZAMP conditions where it's like you can acquire a lock. Some people, it's worded a certain way. I forget exactly how it is, but it deals with having to acquire a lock to be able to fulfill the requirement, like spending the charge to gain a charge. You have to be able to recover a charge to be able to acquire the lock. That's what it was.
Yep.
And people think that should be reversed as something to moderately nerf the card. I don't know how much that will actually do, but either way, there are clear higher priority or egregious ones, like we saw with Hera or Protector Gleb. Whether they feel egregious in a negative way by a majority or a minority of the community, either way, they felt the need to address it, and they did. So there is some level of recency to keep in mind that they are making those changes pretty swiftly as necessary.
Will, you picked a question. What do you think?
Brian took it right out of my head, that they actually do have a great track record of fixing issues, though they might not want to. I don't know how they balance, like, what do I want to say? Maybe like their public persona. Like doing all this big change and then like 2 weeks later be like, oh no, you know what, we actually did mess up pretty big. So like I have to assume that they're going as thorough as possible with this to make sure that they don't have to make an update to it. Though who's to say? There's a lot of cards in the game, but I think their track record stands for itself, that they've been on the ball, already trying to integrate themselves into judge communities, tournament communities, things like things where players play, if that makes sense, to get that like in the, maybe not in the moment, but like I want to say like the most up-to-date information of what like players are playing. So yeah, they should be just fine. I'm worried that what these changes will be, of course, but I think that their response, if anything does happen, should be pretty swift.
Oh, sorry about that. Yep, fixed it already. Andrew Durham asks, basically, he's worried about filler upgrades and that they might cause disorganization or confusion within lists. My argument to that, and I think it's pretty quick, is there's actually quite a few 1 to 2 point upgrades that I think haven't been played in the past, because the bid was just better. Like, it's like, why would I bring let me go ahead and pull up Yasby here. I'm not
thinking of like cheap EBTs like marksmanship, composure,
yeah, like
stable closure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Or starboard slash. Like, they're not, you normally would not have brought those things because they weren't worth using when in our current mindset of list building. But if now they're available and it doesn't hurt you, i.e. it doesn't take away from your bid because bids no longer matter, now you say, hey, if it happens, it happens. But hey, that's what a 1 to 2 point upgrade should be. It's a nice to have, not a my list is built around it.
Andrew's my guy, but and no. Like, if you're filling your list for a tournament, now let's be clear, it's for tournament play, because in casual play you just put whatever you want in there anyway for fun. But if you're filling your tournament list with filler, then you're doing a terrible job building a list. Simple as that. If you can't figure out a better way to add 1 or 2 points, then you're not getting the most out of your list, and you're in that particular case bad at list building. Simple as that. It's kind of rough, but if you can't figure out how to make your list better with 2 or 3 points that's available out there, then you're not looking hard enough. You're not building it. You're missing something. Is the only thing I'm going to say.
All right, Marcel, you want to take this next one that we have on our doc?
Sure, it's by Rishka, and the recent rules announcement changed words are hard. The recent rules announcements changed the macro of the game meta through process behind building lists, but what leave the micro entirely intact. How you perform the phases of a round. What are some of the things that you are most excited for that are a direct result of the changes that are coming our way? I think, for me, and again, I don't know if it made any sense the way I read it. But basically, they're changing big things in the game. What are the little details that aren't being discussed? Is the way that I took that. And I think what I'm most excited about in these changes are just the shift of the list building, because again, that's kind of where I started today's podcast, saying that I'm kind of in a lull of not being motivated to build anything on Yasby or really put stuff out there, because I'm not worried, I'm just not motivated, because I'm like, this is not going to be,
it's about to change.
There's no challenge to it. Yeah, there's no payoff for me, because it's not going to exist. So for me, I'm just most excited about trying to figure out, what the new points are, what I'm going to build, and how I'm going to build, because I like those alpha strike lists. So, and I like out positioning people. I like blocking. I mean, that's, so trying to figure out how to continue to fly the list that I enjoy to fly, and what kind of gems are out there to allow me to play the game the way that I like to play the game. So I don't know. I probably did a terrible job answering specifically what was being asked, but I'll blame the watermelon. Ryan?
So, yeah, they obviously changed a lot of the foundational aspects of the game, and like Rishka mentioned, there's not a lot of the intermediate small stuff, so that impacts from the big to the small. I'm just kind of excited to look at and see how the matchups play out now when we're looking at certain aces at I5 or I6, how they deal with first player. What upgrades that people never used before now get put into good effect, that there's no bid, so I can start taking other things, because the bid mattered so much in the past to guarantee second player, and how that plays out on the board is interesting to me, just because I like getting to see how the players adapt to using their aces and learning how to fly them in a manner that can be they can be successful both as second player and as first player.
Will?
Hold on, if I'm on mute here. I'm not sure. To be honest with you, we will have to find out, I guess.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I would echo what these guys are saying.
For me, what I'm hoping is if some of the things that I'm assuming are going to be banned in the main competitive format are banned, that there's just more emphasis on the dial. The dial needs to matter more, because the dial is the game. That's my thought on that. We've got actually quite a few really good suggestions on some future content that people want to see. And I think one thing that we could do next week is go through a list of upgrades. We'll start with upgrades before we hit pilots, because pilots is a whole nother can of worms. But what are some upgrades that that like multiple factions can take that normally don't get used, and start finding some uses for them. Maybe there was some suggestions for taking lists that normally would have had a bid and showing an example of taking some of those cheaper upgrades or the however many points bids they had and how they would fill that list when a bid doesn't matter. I think those are type of thing. I think that could be really fun to actually do. Go back through Galaxy's, you know, lists and do that. I think that could be a really good exercise to do, as well as exploring some less used upgrades that traditionally have not been quote unquote worth taking over having a bid. I think those could be some great things. And of course, those would be in the context of the points that we know now versus what's in the future. And Will, I thought there was one other thing that we hadn't hit on that I see that you put in the notes.
Yeah, this comes from J.D. Bestis from our Twitch chat here. Brought up the mention of sideboards. I believe Will Stick said it or mentioned it like offhand. I forget when, but remember he said something about a sideboard for tournaments. To explain that better, sometimes in like card deck building competitive games, you might have a list, but you might have some cards set aside as a sideboard they could swap in case you see a matchup that your list or deck isn't normally prepared to handle. Sometimes like a mirror match, I think that's, I don't know much about it, but I would assume it would be like a mirror match. You want to be able to something to counter something that's already in your deck, or see something that, like in X-Wing terms, it's a swarm. So like, well, I want to bring in my Diamond Boron missile instead of my Ion or something like that. How do you guys think a potential sideboard for tournaments could affect competitive play?
It kind of reminds me of Cicatro Vizago. The
first edition.
Yes, first edition
Vizago
version. So for anybody who's not familiar with the card, it essentially said that you could bring illicits that were the same cost or potentially cheaper than the one you have quote unquote equipped already to, I think it was like ships in your squad, and before the game starts you could swap them out. I think it could be interesting to have essentially when a sideboard, depending, if you think a card game, I used to play a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh early in the day, and there was some, in some instances of tournaments, there was some pretty extreme changes you could make to a deck with a sideboard. In X-Wing, we could take it as far as something like you can set aside 10 points worth of upgrades that you can swap, of course, in legal spots in your squad before the start of the game. It could maybe be something along the lines of, like, here is version A, B, and C of my list, but you have to have them like set and say, all right, I'm going to play version B. They all maybe have the same points cost. This one has, I think you had said, this one has Diamond Boron missiles in it, but this one has Mag Pulse and something, you know, the extra points costed somewhere else. I could see it maybe being implemented something like that.
I just hope it's nothing like too extreme, like Hangar Bay. The last thing I want to do is carry around extra stuff at tournaments and stuff like that. So I like the idea of it, but if it's in a very controlled environment where they're like, the most you can swap out is 25 points of your list or something like that, like, or the most you can swap out is one card that has to be equal to or less than, like you said, like the old 1.0 well, click. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name.
Cicatro Vizago.
Something like that. And so I like the idea of it. Again, as long as it's not It's not like hangar bay or like bring an entirely extra ship or something like that. So, but it sounds fun. I mean, it opens up more options, which is good.
Ryan, I'm going to add a twist here before you give your answer. A couple of people in the chat are asking, could a sideboard include ships? What do you think some of the complications, plus minus, could be there?
I mean, overall, I don't think it's going to be able to include swapping out ships. I think is more likely going to be a low set amount of points upgrades. Now, Marcel said 25, which you technically could swap out some ships to be able to do that in certain lists, but that is very low. I think they probably want to keep it as streamlined as possible. So, and if you think about it on a somewhat thematic basis, if you're going into a fight, you generally know what the actual ships that exist in the area and what's going to happen. So, I mean, swapping around some upgrades seems like a thing that's more likely, but I could definitely see, depending on formats, scenarios, objectives, that they could increase the effect of how much you could swap in or out. That could include whole ships. Maybe not swapping out ships, but what if you could swap out a pilot within a ship, right? So you could say, this ship has to be here, but instead of Merrick Steele flying it, it's Zertic Strom or whatever, and you can swap out the leftover points and upgrades you want to use. I think it's probably more likely that it's going to be a small amount, upgrade only, but they got a lot of room to play around with it, that's for sure. I mean, they've set in stone the ability to go any direction they want to.
So I'm not as familiar with, like, I haven't played other tabletop games, so I don't know 40K or anything like that. Is sideboard always swap, or can sideboard ever be a situation where, like, both of you get 30 points, and after round 4 it's a reinforcement or something like that? Is sideboards always a swap, or can sideboard be interpreted as a reinforcement?
That term sideboard would be like a swap, like an extra, like I said, normally used in deck games where you have like 60 cards, but you have a sideboard of say 8 or something. They could swap in before the round, assuming when you see your opponent's list, you have a moment to make an adjustment.
And then there's going to be the question of, like, when do you reveal your changes, right? It's because, like, I changed this. No, well, actually, I changed this. Well, then actually, there's going to be there has to be some type of procedure that's created for that.
La Pirate Baronet or whatever. I always struggle with that one. Actually brought up a good point. In Marvel Crisis, you do technically have a sideboard, but it's not the way you think. That you bring a large amount of characters, and then depending on the scenario and things, you can take off of your roster to build a squad. So you'd have like some leftover characters into it. So it could be the way they go, that you could build a 250 point list, but you can only play 200 points in the tournament. I don't think they'll do that. That seems overly complicated, but there is precedent for it.
Yeah, Will, what you're mentioning is basically something like every professional sports team has. You have the starting players and you have the bench players. That's exactly. It sounds like what Marvel Crisis Protocol does.
Exactly, yep. I mean, I think I forget who mentioned it now. There's a lot. We're talking about a lot of things, but I do think that sideboards do favor some lists rather than others. We were just talking about how aces, you're like, oh, well, I'll just swap in this upgrade, or like, oh, this would be a fun upgrade to swap in. If you're running, like, we'll say 8 foes, you don't have a sideboard. You don't have any extra points. What is it, like BB? BB Blues and Rose. Like, what's your sideboard? Like, are you going to switch out any of those upgrades for something else, right? Would you ever swap out C-3PO for a different crew, depending on the matchup? So I think that it is going to favor certain lists who take advantage of those extra upgrade slots. I'm not sure. We have actually very little information on sideboard. It was just kind of like offhand mentioned, but I think that it could be a way for aces to contract something. I think Starslinger mentioned it was like, well, I just bring passive sensors on my sideboard for my Vader, and if there's a nice 6, we swap out. Otherwise, you keep the fire control system. Like that would make that sideboard so powerful for that list. Whereas like just someone swapping out like, oh, I'm going to use Starboard Slash instead of marksmanship, right? Like not as powerful. So I don't think it's... You
fixed that one by making passive sensors more expensive, by the way.
Well, I mean,
well, it depends. If you want the sideboard to be an X amount of cost, I mean, what if they weigh the sideboard? This sounds probably a bit off, and I know people are probably going to hate me for this, or really like either way, because people love their varied point cost depending on stuff. But the higher total orange number you have in your list, the less sideboard you get.
Or I mean, you could just make the sideboard all +2 cost, right? If you do bring in an upgrade, so like you're not even swapping out an equal upgrade, you have to swap out for a cheaper upgrade.
Well, or when you pay for the stuff to be in your sideboard, they cost X amount more point. Well, that's probably no different than just having a lesser total. But they would be the same equal. It sounds probably going to be confusing to do that. I don't know.
I think sideboard's going to be really confusing. I hope they slowly implement it through tournaments like we've done Hangar Bay in the past. I hope it's not the standard anymore.
No, I think that is one where it's like they said, hey, we're thinking about this, because that was, if I'm remembering correctly, it was like we're looking at sideboards. I think that'll be one that is put out in a small, very confined space, and slowly, if it works out, then it's good. And you know, one of the things I'm gonna connect this back, I promise. I've been thinking about the narrative versus competitive play a lot, and trying to find that balance in my heart, really, on what matters more to me. What drives, and this also comes from a question that I got. Somebody sent me a Facebook message and said, you guys haven't really talked about the business implications of their decisions, and I don't entirely agree with that. I think we've touched on it, and I think it's definitely interesting to think about if they favor narrative versus competitive. How does that affect their bottom lines? But I think wherever they lean in more, if their competitive format, whatever that might end up being, I think you're going to see a lot of the testing ground end up being in those narrative, more casual, less consequential type of events, whatever those end up being. I think that's where we end up seeing some of the experiment stuff first, like a sideboard, like we said. Will, I think you had a perfect example there. Hangar Bay, right? Hangar Bay is kind of the first experiment with that. Which one interesting thing that came about with Hangar Bay was the idea of somebody who just didn't bring a second list, aka didn't bring a sideboard. I don't need it. I'm super confident in this. I'm just gonna play this. I'm just gonna play my one list. I mean, I know of players in the chat who've done that. They go play in a Hangar Bay event, but they didn't come to play Hangar Bay. They came to have 3 rounds of extra practice with their list. So we'll end up seeing how it ends up affecting things. But hopefully talking through this and really trying to look at it from different angles starts to, I think, help people calm down. I want the overall temperature to kind of come down in the X-Wing room, and let's see really what happens. We have a lot of theories on the worst case scenarios, and I think that ends up what ends up getting a lot of the eyes first is the overreaction. Well, if they do this, then if X, then Y can happen, right? There's a lot of overreaction there, but let's end up seeing it. And the last question I want to end here with, and Marcel, I'd like to hear your thoughts first. There's a question here that says, AMG said they want to amplify the factions, the idea of factions, the faction identities more through the points changes and some of the upcoming changes. Could you see different costs for generic upgrades depending on the faction? Question mark?
I think so. It's, you know, if you're looking at, as an example, I'm trying to think of a good example, but probably a good example would be the Gamut key. No, it's not Gamut key. It's the other one. Protector Gleb.
Yeah.
Yeah, where it's definitely more valuable in one versus the other. Or if you're looking at something like Empire, not actually Empire's probably, but like Rebels versus Scum, where Scum has a lot more low initiative generics that can like spam things, and the Rebels are working. You know, the Rebel spam is not really spam; it's more beefy, and they benefit from different things differently. So I can see it that way as far as costing things differently based on which factions they are. But I can also see it them saying like trying to break out the identity more. I mean, there's so many different ways to interpret it. Break out the identity more, where the Scum has actual, identity of, you have the Black Sun, you have, like little pockets of Scum has little pockets of things that are part of the Mandalorian type of setting. Then you have the Black Sun setting, Anyway, but you get it. Like the Rebels have, not the Rebels. The Empire has, back like the last system open, they had all the ships were part of that one. I don't even know, but it's all the TIE fighters that they were giving out.
The Inferno Squadron.
Yeah, the Inferno Squadron. So maybe it could also be not just how they point them, but how they give them like little pockets of identity where these are the ships that participated in this era or in this particular battle, or they were part of, the ABC Squadron or things like that. That's another way that they can be. That's another way of interpreting, giving them like more identity.
That's definitely a way it can go. Definitely. There's some different ideas we see in the chat here. One I want to comment on is I don't think there should ever be 0-point upgrades in the game. No 0-point upgrades, and definitely
not even R5 TK. Shoot your own ships.
Not even R5 TK.
How about negative points? How about negative points, like the
Defender title?
Like the Defender title that definitively makes your ship worse, as compared to the native ability.
It's true. Maybe, and again, I'm talking with our current setting, right? My tune can change as soon as all the stuff ends up happening. But specifically, I was talking about the faction identity cards, because the abilities on each of those cards have. So for instance, right? Let's talk about each of the faction identity cards that currently exist, we're talking about like heroic, ruthless, fearless, disciplined, hopeful, all those, depending on what is good currently in the meta, they have different values there. And then on top of that, just kind of the base mechanics can end up having more value than the others. Right? We, for instance, have compared often like disciplined and hopeful. That disciplined is in general a better card than hopeful is because of the chassis they end up sitting on. Is hopeful bad? Well, right now that's a whole nother debate for another day. But that's, you know, that's the kind of idea. I'd be careful with always making them free. That'd be a little bit strange. But I think one of the, Marcel, to kind of go off of what you're saying with faction identity, I think if I'm AMG, you got to be careful how I like your idea better than if they went a little bit too broad. Because if let's say they said, okay, Scum always gets offensive, we'll go with fearless. Scum always gets to modify things to hits. Right? That seems really powerful. You see Ryan's face right now going, excuse me, what? And Empire always has ways to target lock. And Reb, like, if you make it that simple, I think you could end up putting yourself in a strange corner. Right? So I'm curious to see what they identify as faction identity, because one thing that we've talked about pretty often is that the lines have blurred between what is the faction identity. Very early on in second edition, they were like, oh, rebels always help each other, and Empire is more kind of like do it on your own. But we started just kind of getting a lot of the similar effects done different ways in all the factions, which again, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but I'm curious to see what they identify and try to pursue as the faction identity.
Yeah, that's what I took it as, that it would be swarms are cheaper in CIS and maybe Empire, whereas your swarms might be more expensive in, say, Scum and Rebels, who traditionally wouldn't fly those archetypes. Same thing with like, here's a weird example, but like specialized munitions, like say like it might be more expensive for Rebels to get a hold of like Magpulse munitions, whereas the Empire, who like probably has factories to make this stuff, they would be cheaper to get those specialized munitions. Same thing with like droids. You'd be like, what do I want to say? Well, maybe that, I guess that's more era based, like depending on what time during the
the tech they have available.
Yeah, like the different R models of astromechs like didn't come out until later. So I don't know. That's weird, but that's kind of why I took it as, is trying to get back into like what rock paper scissors, swarm, ace, turret does your faction best represent. Ryan, you had something to say on that as well?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see if the direction we interpret from their points changes, because they said that their points changes upcoming theoretically are going to reflect what they feel like the faction should represent. Is it represented physically within certain ships or pilots being more featured or highlighted, being a little bit cheaper, or the other stuff just being a lot more expensive? Is it going to be more of a like steered path of that type of list building, or is it going to be a feeling? Are they going to exude a sort of like right now, I think the faction that oddly has the most feeling around them is the First Order. They want to give, like, beyond them just having Kylo the faction, they want to stress you out. Not like just with the token, but like they're going to either like stress you out with like a bunch of first FO cadets, or they're going to do effects that negatively affect you, your phasmas, your Petty Officer Thanison, your Commander Pyre, things that give you negative effects on your ships. Is it going to be that feeling effect where they steer you in that sort of trajectory of this is what the faction should feel like when you're playing it, and not specifically feature chassis or pilots? You know, because obviously with Empire, they're known for, like, at least thematically in some aspect, they're very swarm-ish. We see a lot of shots in the movies of just TIE fighters and a smattering of TIE interceptors just flying around the heroes like crazy. But also, we know that in canon, both legend and current canon, that they have a lot of very, very talented pilots outside of just Vader that act as the aces, and they have those really ace level pilots that could come together and make those ace lists. So I'll be curious to see what type of direction AMG takes, if it's more of a tangible, like, these ships or pilots are what we want to focus on to be an identity of the faction to build around. Here's your core, and this is, or here's your options for cores that you can pick from, and this is what you could build around it. Or is it going to be a little more ambiguous, where it's going to turn into what this feels like playing, or what it's going to interpret on a feeling basis on the board?
That's great. That's great. Yeah, and I would definitely love to be, because if they are thinking about faction identity, I'm almost sure, I'm thinking just kind of like as a planner, as a fellow person who's created things before. If they're worried about faction identity, they have had to make a decision on what that is. What they have written somewhere in their AMG notes. The Separatist identity equals this. First Order equals this. And they're going to, if they are actually trying to do identity, they will build around that. And we'll see how obvious or not obvious it is. I'm curious. But again, today's discussion, again, is a lot of rehashing what we did on Thursday. I decided not to upload that as a podcast just because it was just initial reactions. And I think today our thoughts are a bit more refined after being able to actually like digest this over a couple days. So hopefully you enjoyed today's cast, and over the next, as we get more information, we will definitely be discussing it. Make sure to become a part of our Discord if you haven't, to be able to be a part of the conversation. There's a lot of great conversations happening in there, and I think my favorite thing about our Discord community, guys, is people keep it respectful, and if they don't, they get the boot. That's just how it goes. So if you want to have discussions and keep it civil, you know, hit the link in the description down below, or ! Discord. Join us there, and of course, just follow the community guidelines. Keep things positive. Have discussions. Attack the problem, not the person. And let's just try to talk about X-Wing, which is always great. Any closing thoughts, ideas, anything before we go, my friends?
I have a let me say that again. I have a main wish list, something that I'm looking for in the points update, and I want more variable pricing. Variable price, literally everything. I do not care. I don't care how confusing it may look on a PDF. We don't use them anymore. Let's get the variable pricing. And I'm going to be, excited to see where they take advantage of those different ways to point things.
All right. Ryan, anything in closing?
Nothing specific besides just general excitement, I guess, if we're kind of going on the side of like what we're really hoping for out of these upcoming points changes and identities off of what Will mentioned. I hope they make more or the ones currently available tactical relays more appetizing to take as a separatist player at heart. I miss the tactical relays. Only few of them are worthwhile taking in the current meta as it is. I hope either they're more worthwhile going forward or they get a little bit of adjustment to help them out. I like those things. I think they were a great identity piece for the Separatists when they were first shown off, and I'd like to see them in most lists.
Marcel?
I think for me, the thing that I'm most hopeful for is I'm just hoping to get rid of lazy list building and spam. You know, there's always going to be the Nantex. There's always going to be the Barons. There's always going to be things that are cheaper than they probably should be. And I just hate the boringness of, well, I can fit 7 X-Wings now, so let's play 7 X-Wings. Because it fits. So I just don't like that. I find it boring. Like Focho, you know, the 8, those. So whatever it is, I just hope that if they're making the high initiative ships have to rethink how they list build because of the bid and all of that, that it balances out by making the middle to lower initiative list also have to rethink how they list build as well. So I just want a little bit of not of a shakeup only at the higher initiatives, but a shakeup across the board with the way lists are made, and basically more creativity, less spam options means you won't be playing the same ship, hopefully against the same combo, 4 out of 6 games in a tournament.
I would like to say that I think it's boring when I see the same type of ace 3 times on the board across from me as well. So I hope they lessen that. I
agree. I don't like playing against the same aces. I don't like playing against Zam all the time or Bosk all the time. Hopefully there's anytime there's a variety, we all win.
I agree. And I see some people in the chat asking about Adepticon. I don't have more news on that, and once I do, I'll let you know. Thanks for watching and listening, everybody. Stay smart, stay safe. Gold Squadron out.